Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and while this is not yet a full-fledged ABL guide, I do want to highlight DAZZLER in this video. I also want to highlight Storm, but I definitely want to highlight DAZZLER because we often talk about sort of forgotten characters, and DAZZLER is definitely one of those, having not gotten any reworks or buffs since she came out, no uniforms, etc. And also the fact that she buffs mutants who have basically been ignored for a long time. Essentially just screams forgettability, right? But here's what I want to highlight. We're going to cancel with her. We're going to switch back to DAZZLER. We're going to pop the 3. We're going to switch back to Storm. There's tons of switching going on. Why am I doing this? Because I think a lot of people forgot, myself included, DAZZLER's third skill has a buff. So this is a really cool way to highlight her value. Sort of like basically the same as Nick Fury's 5th skill. So I really like this, and I wanted to highlight it because there's a lot of switching as well in ABL, and because of the canceling mechanic, you can switch quite quickly. Let me see where this ends up. Okay, perfect. You can switch quite quickly and then get more value basically out of the switch. So yeah, sorry, it's hard to talk while I'm playing this game mode. I'm still getting used to the game mode. I'm still practicing it, all this stuff. But yeah, you basically get a few chances to buff here with DAZZLER. About 4 or 5 chances to buff. Just had to crank up the volume by accident. My hands are massive these days since I stopped biting my nails. Not information you needed, but information I decided to give you anyways. We're just going to do one more rotation here. Okay. Switch to Kitty. Now, this is a very paywall-centric team, unfortunately, because of the, you know, the double lead here, the DAZZLER, the Kitty Pryde lead and cancel, and then the DAZZLER support. So I know this is not a team that's available to all players. I recognize that, but I have to say, like, I just love the synergy, and I love the fact that DAZZLER has use beyond just being a support, right? So I probably should have held that tier 3 a little bit longer. Maybe not, though. Maybe not. Hang on. Let's see what happens here. Yeah, actually, I think it's fine. Yeah, we're going to get this last one here. We're just going to wait an extra second so that we can then, crank that. We're aiming for 4 million. I think 4 million is a great score considering that I'm not tier 4 here. Okay, we just don't want to lose too much score here before we crank it off, and we're just gonna barely squeak by 4 million. Awesome. All right, 4.4. I think 4.04. I think this is a great score for tier 3, but what it really wanted to highlight was how hard Kitty and DAZZLER are working together. And we always talk about an MFF, how the roster is so small. I mean, the usable roster is so small. The roster is huge in the game, 251 characters, but the usable roster is so small. And one of the advantages of this ABL rework is it has thrust a lot of mediocre characters, forgotten characters, into the spotlight. Now, again, I know some people are going to use this as a platform to complain and say, oh my gosh, they made all the paywall characters, yada, yada, yada. You have to look at it from another point of view as well. Just to quickly discuss that, I know these characters are both paywall, DAZZLER and Kitty Pryde. However, the fracture mechanic, which is the mechanic that's being highlighted, was only introduced in 2018. So it's not like you can see characters from 2015, 16, or 17 unless they've gotten uniforms recently, like Gambit, etc. Who would be able... And actually, Gambit was only introduced in 2018 as a standalone character anyways. But the fracture mechanic wasn't introduced until then, so that's why you see it on many fewer characters. This mechanic is going to rotate out. It's not going to be fracture forever. It's on a 2-week rotation. For those of you who are not familiar with how ABX works, you know, it's burn for 2 weeks in ABX. And then it's silence for 2 weeks, and then it's paralysis for 2 weeks in ABX. So ABL is going to be the same, and it's going to rotate over. We believe, according to information that's out there floating around, that it's going to rotate to shock and it's going to rotate to bind. Shock and bind have been in the game since the beginning. since I believe since 2015. However, I think bind used to be called snare or and now it's called bind, or it used to be called bind and now it's called snare. I'm not sure if it's bind or snare, but it's the same idea. You know, it's like in Pokemon, the snare thing where it just like it sort of paralyzes you and stops you from moving, and it doesn't do any damage, whereas shock shocks you and does continuous shock damage, and then fracture lowers your attack, and also stops you from healing. So they all have different effects. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make here is unintentionally too specific ABL guide, mini guide sort of thing. The point I'm trying to make here is that's why you're going to see fewer old characters featured unless they've gotten uniforms recently. Like Iron Man obviously didn't have any fracture on his kit until very recently. Thankfully, his last two uniforms both do have fracture, I believe on his second skill. Yeah, but that's why these newer characters are being highlighted. But it's also still really good. Like, even though they're paywall, I would rather have this than what we had before, which was just the smaller rotation of characters without much highlight for the rest of the existing roster. So yeah, this is the best team for today. Obviously, you would prefer to tier 4 your Storm and then be able to use Negasonic as a striker. You would still want to use Kitty as a lead. I don't know if you could use her as a lead and as a striker. I'm guessing you could, although I'm not sure. But yeah, it would be either her or Negasonic as the striker, and then you would still want to use Dazzler support, but you would still want to switch to Dazzler, right? And again, people are hoping Dazzler gets a Transcendence or a tier 3 because she's an amazing support for mutants, and they'd love to use her in World Boss Legend, but at least now we have a place to use her in the meantime for ABL, like we've been using Nick Fury and Coulson and these other characters who are yet to get their upgrade in ABX. So yeah, don't forget about Disco Spin. It gives that buff that heals every second, which is actually really nice for Storm as well. But if you're taking damage in ABL, you're not going to have any score. But it also gives you that buff, that 35% attack and defense buff, and then the crit rate buff as well. So it actually gives a lot of buffs. Storm doesn't need the crit rate buff. I believe she already has a frenzy buff, but the attack buff is really nice. And as you can see here, the buff here, it triggers, right? And then if you walk out, right, you're not going to have it. And then if you walk back in, it appears again. And then if you walk out, it's going to time out. And then if you walk back in, it's going to appear. So yeah, don't sleep on Dazzler. This skill's also just amazing. She summons the mirror ball, the disco ball, and then you got this really cool rainbow, sort of rainbow road look on the ground. So yeah, that's honestly the most charming thing about MFF, is being able to reach into your bag, right, your roster of characters, and pull out these forgotten relics, dust them off, and then, hey, I now have a use for this character. Hey, we suddenly have a use for whoever it is, right? Sif, or you know, Elsa, or you know, Warpath, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. I'm also happy that I figured it out, because I did a couple runs without it and it just felt like something was missing, and then it finally clicked in my head and I was like, oh right, Dazzler's third skill, just like Nick Fury's fifth skill. So yeah, that's the video I wanted to make for you guys today. Just something short, just something sweet, but I definitely think we need more of this, and hopefully the devs will, you know, roll this idea for ABL into other pieces of content to allow us to highlight more of our roster on a regular basis, because that's what ABX and ABL does. It highlights characters that I otherwise don't use much of today. These days, like for example, today, my score's not that great, but I'm using Supergiant. And honestly, I don't use Supergiant in much content anymore because tier 4s exist for World Boss Legend. She's not a good farmer for Dimension Rifts or Story Mode or, Dispatch. She's not that good for PvP, right? So there you go. She still gets play. And yesterday was the same thing with some other character. You sort of get the point. So hopefully this idea rolls into other game modes. I would love to see it in Shadowland, a refresh there. I'd love to see it in Timeline Battle PvP or AC, refresh there. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. Hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.